This doesn't need to be here. Opa! Why can I not read? Is the amount what? Stop making noise. Why am I struggling? We've got the coronavirus on the rise again, the Black Lives Matter movement is still pushing for justice, and unemployment is at the highest it's ever been since the Great Depression. Not to mention the presidential election that is just right around the corner that has all of us wondering who exactly is the lesser of the two evils. To say that American citizens are under kind of a lot of stress nowadays would be a vast understatement. But another thing I find particularly interesting about all the civil unrest that is happening in the world nowadays is the amount of talk, attempts, and pushback for people who are trying to take down or destroy various famous figures from history. Which, seeing this, really got me wondering, why are we continuing to glorify these famous figures who, first of all, weren't exactly good people, and second of all, no longer represent the America that we are today? What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. I am Shelby Nave, and today we are going to be talking about famous, glorified historical figures who are actually kind of the worst. Not all, but some of the people who I want to talk about today do actually have a memorial or statue that has been attempted to be destroyed or taken down. Now, I have my own opinions about whether or not that we should be trying to take down statues that may not represent the ideals of America any longer, but let's go ahead and discuss some of the historical figures in America that our textbooks love to tell us were good people. I do my best to always fact check myself. If I say something in this video that you don't think is accurate, please nicely correct me in the comments below. I repeat, nicely, because I know some of the topics that I'm going to be talking about in this video can be a little touchy, and we can all discuss differences in views without getting crazy. So now, let's get into it. Christopher Columbus. I'm not going to spend too much time on old C² here because in the future I actually want to make an entire video just devoted to him. But this video would just absolutely not be complete if we didn't at least mention him. As I'm sure most of you know by now, Christopher Columbus is the Italian explorer who went down in history as the man who discovered America in 1492. After sailing the ocean blue, of course. I mean, not only are we just kind of ignoring the fact that the Americas were in fact inhabited by the time that Columbus got there, aka they were already discovered by someone, but he may not have even been the first explorer from the old world to actually discover America, which is what he is most famously credited for. So why is he one of the worst figures in our country? The short answer to that is that he's responsible for the mutilation, torture, and deaths of millions of Native Americans. He was so unimaginably cruel to these people who he immediately forced into slavery, very purposefully mistreated and brutally killed, but he did not care. He had a lot to gain by wiping out their population and taking over their lands. Biography.com says, Columbus stood to gain significant wealth and power from his voyage, terms he negotiated with King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain. His contract with the monarchs, called the Capitulations of Santa Fe, named Columbus the admiral, viceroy, and governor of any land he discovered. Yeah, because Spain totally has the right to take over any undiscovered lands that doesn't belong to them, you know? Yeah, totally. It also stated that Columbus could keep 10% of any merchandise, whether pearls, precious stones, gold, silver, spices, and other objects that he acquired within the new territory. Columbus may indeed have had noble intentions when he sailed west, but his agreement with Spain suggests his intentions were far from selfless. You don't say. In an effort to take over these Indians' lands, he would do things like publicly behead people, whip them, or chop off one of their limbs if they didn't bring him enough gold, which he got to keep a cut of based on his deal that he made with the Spanish crown. And it got to the point where these Native Americans were destroying their stores and committing suicide to avoid getting captured or killed by the Spaniards. Columbus also said himself that he would sell girls as young as 9 years old into sex slavery. But I mean, to top it all off, he wasn't just nasty to the Native Americans. Apparently he was an asshole to his own crew members as well, and would give them things like 100 lashes if they used any of their gold to buy food, despite the fact that the majority of them were starving. And, you know, 100 lashes, you know, more often than not, that's fatal. So at least he was just, you know, awful to everybody. So now that we know a little bit more about Columbus's character, it raises the question, why are we still celebrating this man? Not only does he have his own official holiday, but we have all sorts of cities, towns, roads, monuments, and memorials all over the country dedicated to this man, which of whom, by the way, never actually stepped foot on North American soil. During all four of Columbus's voyages to the New World, not one of them was to North America specifically. He only encountered Central and South America and the Caribbean islands. So why is he all over the place in North America? A big reason for that is because a very idealized version of Columbus rose actually during the American Revolution, when people kind of needed some sort of like iconic symbol or idol, if you will, for the cause. Kind of, you know, keep everyone going, I guess. And, you know, Christopher Columbus was the rebellious explorer who discovered the land that Americans are now fighting for. And also, he's not British, so he kind of perfectly fit that. The idolized version of him got worse in 1828 when Washington Irving wrote a book about Columbus, calling him brave and heroic and a genius, but forgot to mention, you know, the whole mass genocide part of his story. What? You mean he left that out on purpose? Why would he do that? In 1894, 400 years after Columbus's discovery of America, Columbus Day was implemented into schools where kids would be taught a false narrative and celebrate him and pledge their allegiance to the flag and his name, of course turning him into even more of a patriotic figure. A mass murderer who has never even set foot on this continent has a holiday celebrating him in our country. That makes my soul hurt. I strongly believe that Columbus Day should be changed to like Native American Day or Indigenous People Day, where it's a day where we remember all of those who perished because of Christopher Columbus. And don't get me wrong, there's no doubt that Christopher Columbus contributed a lot to history by being a person who kind of bridged that gap between the old world and the new world, but I don't necessarily think that we should be still glorifying him the way that we do, because I feel like all of us can mutually agree that a large part of his legacy is based off a myth. Wow, I said I wasn't going to spend too much time talking about him, and I'm over here talking a lot about him. Alright, next overglorified historical figure that we're going to be talking about is Andrew Jackson, President Trump's favorite president, who is kind of insane. Just, you know, just a lot of it. Aside from being the 7th president of the United States, Andrew Jackson is known for being a war hero, particularly in defeating the British in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend and the Battle of New Orleans and other efforts in the War of 1812. But we're not here to talk about his accomplishments. We're here to talk about why he is actually less than ideal. Let's start off with the major one. In 1830, Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, which forced Indians to hand over 23 million acres of their land and get moved westward on a path better known as the Trail of Tears. 70,000 Native Americans lost their homes, and 4,000 Native Americans actually died as they were forced to make this march without any supplies or food. So I think it's pretty safe to say that Andrew Jackson wasn't exactly a fan of the Native Americans. He eventually gained the nickname Sharp Knife by the Cherokee because of how often he would go and, you know, slaughter their tribe. Neato! Sick nickname. I bet he's really proud of it. Weirdly enough though, despite the fact of him clearly not favoring the Indians, he did adopt 2 of them, 2 Indian children, as his own, which is surprisingly out of character, but cool. But not only was he not really a fan of the Native Americans, he also wasn't a fan of the African Americans either. Unless he owned them, of course. Andrew Jackson owned 161 slaves at the time of his death and made a very large portion of his living by participating in the domestic slave trade. Not to mention, Jackson is responsible for nominating Roger Taney into the U.S. Supreme Court, who became famous for the Dred Scott decision, basically ruling that African Americans do not have any legal standing to file a lawsuit in the U.S. because they're not actually American citizens. Almost immediately after entering the presidency, he created the spoils system and fired 919 federal officials and replaced them with his own supporters, because why surround yourself with people who could potentially disagree with you? Other fun things about Jackson is that he was actually quite the gambler who ended up gambling away his grandfather's entire inheritance. Plus, he notoriously hated the banking system in America, and he pretty much single-handedly sparked an economic depression by shutting down the Second Bank of America. Why is this man on our $20 bill? He's probably one of the most financially irresponsible people to be making big money decisions for the country. This guy is so wacky. Speaking of, Andrew Jackson was also kind of known for being a hothead and participating in duels a lot. It's not entirely known how many duels he's actually participated in his lifetime, but most people say anywhere between 10 and 100, which in my eyes 10 is already a lot of duels for one person. But I think it's pretty safe to say that he was kind of a violent person. I think that's fair. I think we can say that. He actually was the first president to have an assassination attempt pulled on him by a man named Richard Lawrence, who pulled 2 pistols on Jackson and both of them misfired. I'm sorry, that's just so incredibly unfortunate for him, especially since they apparently reviewed the guns after the fact and both of them were deemed perfectly functional. But when the guns didn't go off, Jackson took his his hickory cane, which according to hardwoodinfo.com, hickory is the strongest wood in America, and he beat the shit out of this guy who almost tried to kill him, which that instance eventually earned him the nickname Old Hickory, apparently. And you know what's funny is I certainly don't remember in my school textbooks that Jackson's nickname Old Hickory was because he beat the shit out of his attacker with his cane. I mean, others say that he actually got the nickname from his like fellow soldiers or whatever because he was tough as hickory. But I mean, either way, like I think it's pretty safe to say that he was a violent person, which I had never done too much research before this video about Jackson's upbringing, and after doing so, it started to make a lot more sense to me why he is actually the way that he is. He honestly had a pretty tragic upbringing. His father died before he was born, his eldest brother died in battle, and then his younger brother and his mom both died from disease, all before he was the age of 14. Plus, he volunteered to fight in the American Revolution at 13 years old. 13 years old! Can you imagine being in the Revolutionary War when you were 13 years old? Apparently, it was at the age 13 that he killed his first person during that time period, which no wonder this guy is so messed up and violent. He has spent entirely too much of his young life being focused on war and death and murder and hating the British. But he was also apparently a prisoner of war for the British at this age. And like I said, it's just starting to make so much more sense why he would be this way. Not only joining the revolution, but starting to kill people and be a prisoner of war at 13 years old? Boy, I couldn't imagine that. Alright, I've begun babbling a little too long on the first two people. I'm gonna try to keep it short and pick up the pace for the rest of the video. Next up is Thomas Edison. Obviously, Thomas Edison is very famous for his inventions, like the light bulb, for instance, and he has something like 1,000 patents to his name for all of the various works that he's done. But again, it seems like the history books have recorded many of his highlights and then conveniently forgot to add in all the things that make him a little less ideal. From what I read, it does kind of seem like Thomas Edison was actually quite petty and egotistical and would actively try to compete with, screw over, and slander other inventors. George Westinghouse was another inventor who focused on alternating current AC machines, while Edison was invested in his direct current DC machines. Edison started a slander campaign against AC, saying that it was dangerous, and to prove this point, he would have these live events to showcase the electrocution of dogs, horses, cattle, and even an elephant. So not only was this a petty slander campaign to discredit someone else's work and make his work seem superior, but he's also an animal abuser. Nice! Oh, and AC Power still won in the end, so all of those efforts to kind of keep AC from excelling were kind of essentially for nothing. I mean, again, don't get me wrong, Thomas Edison definitely brought a lot of positive things to the world. It just makes me mad when we all conveniently forget about the less than pleasant things that he has also done. Moving on, Woodrow Wilson. So Woodrow Wilson served as the 28th president of the United States, and he's known more for his like progressive contributions to the country. His major accomplishments include the establishment of the Federal Reserve System, passing child labor laws, antitrust laws. He sort of supported women's suffrage, and he helped end World War I. But despite all the good that he brought to the country, he was actually also very, very racist. He made many racist statements publicly, but also in the many books that he wrote. According to an article by The Grunge, he personally fired all but 2 black supervisors in the federal service and replaced them all with white people. He apparently killed a racial equality proposal for the League of Nations, and he hosted the first ever private screening at the White House of the very racist film titled The Birth of a Nation, which is basically a film all about the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. This entire movie is on YouTube, by the way. I went and just watched little bits of it, but I stopped when I saw this quote that was actually in the movie itself and decided that was enough of him for one day. Alright, next up we have Teddy Roosevelt. Adding Teddy Roosevelt to this list, it does make me sad, because same with many of these other people that I'm talking about, they did bring a lot of good, so it's honestly really sad that they also had this bad. But anyway, Teddy Roosevelt was our 26th president of the United States who did numerous positive things for the country, such as building the Panama Canal, establishing workers' compensation laws, actively contributing to environmental conservation, and passing food and drug regulations. He received the Nobel Peace Prize for the negotiations he made in the Russo-Japanese War, and he also got the Medal of Honor for his acts of bravery in the US Army. So like, he's done a lot He's done a lot of things. And, you know, despite him being a very accomplished American president, he too was also pretty racist. And it's an unfortunate reality that many of these powerful men from the past were also racist. But I guess with these people, I'm pointing out how they were, or they seemed, maybe a bit more racist or just more vocal about their beliefs than others. But again, according to the grunge, Roosevelt believed in the literal supremacy of American civilization and defended practically any effort to expand that civilization. He encouraged a lot of this expansion overseas, including the taking over of the Philippines from France, in which he allowed for the civilizing the Filipinos by force, which resulted in numerous war crimes and, of course, thousands of Filipino deaths. Yeah, and I don't remember reading about that in high school. Last but not least, we're going to be talking about Franklin D. Roosevelt. He was our 32nd president of the United States, and he too had a little bit of a race issue. He is most recognized, of course, for his contributions in World War II, aka defeating the Nazis, but he also did things such as establishing Social Security and ending Prohibition. But now on to some of the not so good. Something I noticed that people definitely don't seem to talk about is that right before the Holocaust was in full swing, FDR turned away thousands of European Jews who were trying to escape from Nazi Germany because he feared that they were spies. Which, to be quite honest, I don't think I believe that. I personally feel like nobody really wanted to help the Jews, so world leaders kept turning them away, and I think Nazi Germany was pretty clear in their intentions that they were going to eliminate the Jews if another country didn't take them. And since nobody did, the Holocaust happened, and when people around the world started figuring out what was actually going on, the US was like, we had no idea Hitler would do this. I don't know, that's just my opinion. Feel free to give me yours if you think that is very wrong. But potentially worse than that decision was his decision in World War II when he decided to lock up approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans into concentration camps here in the US. This, of course, happened after the Japanese bombed the naval base in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The government feared for Japanese spies, so FDR ordered that anyone with 1/16 or more of Japanese descent had to be evacuated and moved to concentration camp facilities in the US where sanitation was pretty poor and there was frequent food shortages. This one really bothers me in particular because these were Japanese Americans. Like, these were our own people, many of which were actually born here, and they were arrested and treated like criminals with absolutely no cause or evidence, which is a massive violation of American civil rights. I mean, it wasn't just us. Canada and Mexico did pretty much the exact same thing, but I still think that all of us could have found a better solution. But that's all I really have to say about that. So most of the people I talked about, or actually I think all of the people that I just talked about, have probably some sort of memorial or monument or statue in their honor. And that opens up the question I think a lot of people have today, which is, based on the acts that these people have done, should their memorial pieces be taken down or in some cases destroyed, along with a whole bunch of other ones that are getting attacked right now that are like Confederate leaders and stuff like that. Especially since many of the ideals that these men had, particularly towards racism and brutality toward minority groups, no longer matches the morals of most Americans. Here's what I think. First of all, I don't think that we should be destroying any of the statues, but hear me out. I don't agree with destroying it just because, like it or not, those people and those things that those statues are representing are a part of our history. And the goal isn't to erase or change history, it's to preserve it and learn from it. But just because I think they shouldn't be destroyed, that doesn't mean that some of them shouldn't be taken down and perhaps moved to a museum or something. Not because we should continue honoring these people for the wrong things that they did, but so we can continue to remember and learn why we aren't like that anymore. I feel like there's no bigger disservice that we can do for ourselves than try to erase what we used to be. It's important to remember all parts of the past, the good and the bad, because we need those things to reference back to. That's how we all as a society become better. But the really difficult thing for me to think about in terms of the whole statue thing of what statues should stay up, which ones should come down, that begs the question of, okay, so then where do we draw the line? What memorials, monuments, statues are we going to continue to celebrate and which ones are we not? Because as I just discussed, there's plenty of presidents who made monumental contributions to this country in a positive way. Changes that have helped this country thrive into what it is today so that we can even be having these conversations. But on the flip side, some of those very same people also did really bad things. But the time was also very different, and just society in general, the way of living was very different as well. And just America as a whole pretty much holds different values and morals than it did before. And so with all things considered, where do you draw the line? Who gets to keep their memorial and who doesn't? I don't actually have an answer for this one. I hope that you guys will leave me your opinions below. I'm genuinely curious of what you think, so please enlighten me. But I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about some of these over-glorified people who are actually kind of the worst. If you like this video, definitely give me a thumbs up down below, and don't forget to subscribe. It really does help me out. If you would like to hang out with me in between uploads, I have linked all my social media below. You can go give me a follow if you want. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you the next time I upload a new video.